The grand dining hall of the Raymond mansion shone like gold that evening. Tall chandeliers spilled warm light over the long table, covered with silver dishes and crystal glasses. The sound of soft violin music floated through the air, while servants moved quietly, serving the guests. At the head of the table sat Mr. Raymond, a man of great wealth and quiet pride. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his face calm but strong. To anyone who looked at him, he was the image of success, a man who had built an empire from the ground up. Beside him sat his fiancée, Eleanor, a woman whose beauty often silenced rooms. She had soft golden hair, deep green eyes, and a smile that could melt hearts. People said she was lucky to find a man like Raymond, but others whispered that he was even luckier to have a woman like her. Dinner that night was special. It was meant to celebrate their upcoming wedding. Guests laughed, toasts were made, and every dish on the table looked like a piece of art. Raymond felt happy, almost peaceful. For years he had dreamed of this kind of love, a partner to share his world with, someone to walk beside him through life's noise and silence. When he looked at Elena, he saw perfection. She was graceful, polite, and always knew how to please him. What he did not know was that beneath that soft smile hid a shadow he could not yet see. The head chef entered with the main course, a fine soup made with expensive spices. The smell filled the hall, rich and sweet. Raymond leaned forward, hungry and relaxed. He took the spoon in his hand and stirred the soup slowly. As he lifted the spoon toward his mouth, the door to the kitchen opened suddenly with a loud creak. Everyone turned. A young maid named Maya ran inside, her face pale and her breath shaking. She looked frightened, her hands trembling as she clutched her apron. "Wait, don't eat that," she cried. The words sliced through the music like lightning. The violin stopped. Every guest froze. The spoon slipped from Raymond's fingers and hit the plate with a sharp sound that echoed in the silence. Eleanor's eyes widened, and then her smile disappeared as quickly as a candle blown out. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The servants stared, unsure of what to do. The air grew heavy, and the smell of the soup suddenly felt strange, too strong. Raymond blinked in confusion. "What did you say?" he asked slowly. Maya swallowed hard. "Sir, please don't eat that," she said in a soft but desperate voice. Her eyes darted to Elena and then back to Raymond. She looked terrified, like someone who had seen something she was not supposed to see. Elena stood from her chair, her voice sharp. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Are you dare interrupt dinner like this? Have you lost your mind?" The guests began whispering among themselves. Some looked at Maya with pity. Others looked annoyed. But Maya didn't move. She kept her eyes on Raymond, her voice trembling. "Please, sir. I mean no disrespect. But I beg you, don't eat that soup." Raymond's face hardened. He was a man who believed in order and respect. "Maya, this is serious. Do you realize what you are saying?" "Yes, sir," she replied quickly. "I saw something. Something wrong." Eleanor gave a soft laugh, though her voice quivered slightly. "She's only a maid, darling. She probably spilled something and got scared." Then she turned to Maya, her tone turning cold. "If you're trying to draw attention, this isn't the way. Apologize to Mr. Raymond and leave." But Maya didn't move. She looked close to tears. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't let him eat that." The room filled with uneasy silence. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grand clock on the wall. Raymond studied Maya carefully. She had always been quiet, honest, never the kind to cause trouble. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else. Truth. Finally, Raymond pushed his chair back and stood. "Very well," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Maya, tell me what's wrong." The maid hesitated. Her fingers twisted the edge of her apron. "Sir, I saw Miss Elena in the kitchen earlier," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was speaking to the chef. She gave him a small packet. Something silver. She said, 'Make sure he eats it all.'" The guests gasped. Eleanor's face turned pale, but she quickly forced a smile. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "Raymond, please don't listen to her. She must have misunderstood." Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am. I didn't misunderstand. I saw it clearly." Raymond looked between them, confusion spreading across his face. Eleanor reached for his hand. "Darling, please. She's trying to destroy our evening. I'll have her removed." But Raymond gently pulled his hand away. His instincts told him something was off. He had spent years dealing with liars and cheaters in business. He could sense when someone was hiding something. He looked at Maya again. She was trembling, but her eyes were honest. "Maya," he said slowly, "did you tell anyone else about this?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. But when I saw you about to eat, I couldn't stay quiet." A low murmur spread among the guests. Some were whispering that the maid was crazy. Others wondered if there was truth in her words. The tension in the room grew thick. Elena's perfect composure began to crack. She tried to laugh again, but her voice broke. "You can't seriously believe this nonsense. Why would I ever harm you?" Raymond didn't answer. He picked up the spoon again, but didn't eat. He stared at the soup, then at Elena, then at Maya. "I'm not sure what to believe," he said quietly, "but tonight I'll trust caution over comfort." He placed the spoon down. For the first time, Elena looked nervous. Her fingers tightened around her napkin. "You're embarrassing me," she whispered harshly. "Perhaps," Raymond replied, his tone distant, "but I'd rather be embarrassed than buried." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Maya stood still, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She didn't know what would happen next, whether she'd be fired or thanked, but she had spoken the truth. As the servants began to clear the table under Raymond's order, the room remained silent. The golden chandelier above no longer looked beautiful. It cast long, uneasy shadows over everyone's faces. Something dark had entered that perfect evening, and no one could pretend it wasn't there. Raymond looked at Elena one last time. Her eyes met his, but behind her forced smile was something cold, something that made him feel a chill deep in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that one warning had just saved his life and revealed the first crack in the mask of the woman he thought he loved. Maya stood frozen after her warning, her heart thudding in her chest like a drum. The guests were whispering, their faces a mix of curiosity and shock. The air in the grand dining room felt thick and heavy now, like something unseen had slipped inside and was watching everyone. Raymond's eyes stayed fixed on Maya, trying to read the truth in her trembling face. Elena sat beside him, perfectly still, her fingers tightening around her napkin under the table. The silence stretched long, broken only by the faint hum of the chandelier above. Finally, Raymond spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the whispers. "Maya," he said, "I asked you to explain what you saw." Maya swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. "Sir," she began quietly, "I was in the kitchen about an hour ago cleaning the dishes from the last course. I saw Miss Elena walk in. I thought it was strange because she never comes there during dinner." She glanced quickly at Elena, then back at Raymond. She was holding a small silver packet. She gave it to the chef and said something I didn't fully hear. But before she left, I heard her clearly say, "Make sure he eats it all." A murmur spread through the guests like a wave. Eleanor let out a short laugh, but it didn't sound natural. It was too high, too quick. "Raymond, please," she said, forcing a smile. "This is absurd." She must have misunderstood. "Maybe I gave the chef salt or spices. I do that sometimes, don't I?" She turned toward the chef, who stood at the far end of the room, pale and shaking. The man's lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked terrified. Raymond's eyes narrowed. "Chef Thomas," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is that true? Did Miss Elena give you something for this meal?" The chef's eyes darted toward Eleanor, then to Raymond, then back again. His hands trembled as he spoke. "Sir, I can't say. You can't say," Raymond repeated slowly, taking a step toward him. "Or you won't say?" The room fell completely silent again. Everyone's attention shifted to the trembling man in the chef's uniform. Finally, he lowered his head. "Sir," he whispered, "she told me to put it in the soup." Gasps filled the room. One woman at the table covered her mouth. Another man dropped his fork. Eleanor shot up from her seat, her eyes blazing. "You liar!" she shouted. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" Her voice cracked and her hands shook. "Raymond, you know me. You know I would never hurt you." Maya stepped back, afraid. She had spoken the truth, but now she could feel the danger of it. Elena's eyes turned toward her like knives. "You!" she hissed. "You planned this, didn't you? You want to destroy me so you can get attention. That's what this is about." Maya shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. I swear I didn't. I only said what I saw. Enough." Raymond's voice thundered across the room. Everyone went silent instantly. He looked at Elena, his face a mix of confusion and pain. "Eleanor," he said slowly, If this is false, I'll know soon enough. But if it's true—" He didn't finish the sentence. His eyes looked darker now, colder. Eleanor tried to step closer to him, but he moved slightly away. "Darling," she said, her voice softening, "you can't really think I'd do such a thing. You love me, don't you?" Raymond looked at her long and hard. He remembered the nights they had spent together, the laughter, the way she held his hand when he spoke about his late parents. He had trusted her completely. But now something didn't feel right. Her words were smooth, but her eyes flickered with panic. "Love," he said quietly, "is built on trust. And tonight I don't know what to trust anymore." Eleanor's lips trembled. She looked around, realizing that every pair of eyes in the room was watching her, not with admiration anymore, but suspicion. The proud image she had built for herself was cracking. "You're making a mistake," she said weakly. "You'll regret this." Raymond turned to the chef again. "What was in the packet?" The chef hesitated. "Sir, I didn't open it. She told me not to. But when I poured it into the pot, it smelled strange, like chemicals. I threw away the packet in the trash behind the kitchen." "Bring it," Raymond ordered. 2 servants rushed out at once. Elena sank back into her chair, her face pale as snow. She tried to compose herself, but her hands would not stop shaking. Maya stood near the wall, clutching her apron tightly, afraid to breathe. She wished she had never seen what she saw, yet deep down she knew she had done the right thing. A few minutes later, the servants returned, holding a half-burned silver packet in a cloth. Raymond took it and examined it closely. The edges were singed, but a faint chemical smell lingered. He looked up, his voice steady but icy. "Elena," he said, "what is this?" She didn't answer. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her beautiful green eyes darted from Raymond to the guests, then to the floor. For the first time that night, she looked truly cornered. "I don't know," she whispered. But even she didn't sound convinced. Raymond nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I see." He turned to Maya. "Thank you, Maya," he said softly. "You may step back now." The maid nodded quickly, her eyes glistening. She had no idea what her words had set in motion. Raymond signaled for the head butler. "No one leaves this room until we know the truth." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. The violinist quietly placed his instrument down and stepped aside. Elena's breathing grew uneven. The image of calm and grace she always wore was gone, replaced by fear and anger. She looked at Raymond with tearful eyes. "You're letting them humiliate me," she said. "Or you're choosing their word over mine." Raymond didn't respond. He looked down at the soup, untouched and cooling on the table. The smell that had once seemed delicious now felt poisonous. "Maybe," he said finally, "but tonight I will choose caution." He raised his head, his voice deep and final. "Because love shouldn't come with a warning." A long silence followed. Everyone in the room could feel the shift. Something inside the mansion had changed forever. And though no one spoke it aloud, every soul there knew this was no longer just a dinner. It was the beginning of a truth that could destroy them all. The night outside the mansion had turned stormy, the wind howling softly against the tall glass windows as the truth began to twist through the golden walls of the dining room. The smell of the soup still hung in the air, thick and heavy, like a warning no one could ignore. Raymond stood near the table, his face pale but firm, while the guests sat silently, afraid to move. Elena's perfect smile had disappeared, replaced by a mask of tension. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap, pretending to be calm, though her heart raced like thunder. The silver packet lay on the table, its faint chemical smell now filling the entire room. Raymond's eyes stayed on it, the disbelief on his face slowly turning into suspicion. He had built his whole life trusting facts, not emotions, yet tonight the facts were too sharp to ignore. Maya stood quietly near the doorway, her fingers twisting together nervously. She didn't want to look at Elena, but she could feel her burning glare even from across the room. The chef stood near the corner, shaking and whispering prayers under his breath. Everyone could sense that something dark had been uncovered, something far worse than a ruined dinner. Raymond broke the silence with a single question that seemed to echo through the room. "Where did you get this?" His voice was low but strong. Eleanor looked up at him, her lips trembling slightly. "I already told you I don't know," she said quickly. "You're making a mistake, Raymond. You're believing a maid over me." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Then prove it," he said coldly. If you're innocent, then you have nothing to fear. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. What do you want me to do? She asked softly. Eat it, Raymond said simply. A gasp ran through the guests. Maya's heart jumped in her chest. Eleanor's eyes widened. What? She whispered. You want me to eat the soup? If it's harmless, then you have no reason to refuse, he said, his voice calm but cutting. Elena looked down at the bowl, her reflection trembling in the liquid surface. Her throat went dry. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room fixed on her. For a moment she thought of denying him, of storming out and ending the humiliation, but then she realized that would only make her look guilty. Slowly she reached for the spoon. Her hand trembled as she lifted it, her eyes never leaving Raymond's. She brought the spoon close to her mouth but stopped just before it touched her lips. No, she whispered suddenly. I won't do this. Raymond's voice was quiet. Why not? Elena's breathing quickened. Because it's insane, she snapped. So you think I'll poison myself to satisfy your paranoia? Raymond stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned to the chef. You said it smelled like chemicals. The man nodded quickly. Yes, sir. It didn't smell like any spice I've used before. Raymond motioned to the head butler. Bring the food tester, he ordered. Within minutes, a small elderly man entered the room, a loyal servant who had worked for Raymond's family for years. Without a word, he bowed and stepped forward. Eleanor's eyes filled with panic. No, wait, she cried. But it was too late. The food tester took a small sip of the soup, swallowed, and stood still. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his face turned pale and he began to cough violently. The guests screamed. Two servants rushed to hold him as he gasped for breath. Raymond's eyes widened in horror. Call the doctor, he shouted. Maya covered her mouth in shock. The old man collapsed but was still breathing, barely. The butler ran to call for help. Elena backed away from the table, her voice shaking. I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. I don't know what's happening. Raymond turned to her slowly, disbelief and anger burning in his eyes. You don't know, he said bitterly. You nearly killed a man. Tears rolled down Elena's cheeks, but they seemed forced, unnatural. Raymond, please, you have to believe me, she whispered. Someone is trying to frame me. He took a step closer, his voice low but dangerous. Who would want to frame you, Elena? Who even knew about this dinner except the people in this room? Elena looked around desperately, her gaze landing on Maya. Her, she cried suddenly. The maid! She hates me because I once scolded her. She's the one who planted this. The room erupted in murmurs. Maya's face turned white. That's not true, she cried. I swear, sir, I only saw what happened. I didn't touch anything. Raymond raised his hand for silence. His expression was cold now, almost unreadable. Enough, he said. No one speaks until the doctor arrives. The room went quiet again, except for the soft groans of the food tester, who was now lying on a sofa, slowly regaining his breath. Maya's heart pounded in fear, wondering if she had made things worse by speaking up. Elena sat down again, covering her face with her hands, pretending to cry, but Raymond noticed that not a single tear fell. He stood still for a long time, staring at the untouched bowl of soup that had almost ended his life. The lightning flashed outside, lighting up the chandelier above them. When the sound of thunder followed, it felt like the mansion itself was reacting to the truth being uncovered. At last, Raymond spoke in a quiet, broken voice. I trusted you, he said to Eleanor, more than anyone in my life. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me. Eleanor looked up sharply. You think I need your money? She shouted. You think that's why I'm here? Raymond didn't answer. His silence was louder than any words. He simply turned away, walking toward the window, his reflection dark against the glass. Behind him, Elena's mask of sorrow slowly melted into anger. Her eyes hardened, and her lips curled slightly, almost into a smirk. No one else saw it except Maya. In that moment, Maya understood something chilling. Elena was not done yet. This was only the beginning of something much darker, and soon, the real truth about her would come to light. The mansion was drowned in uneasy silence, except for the faint ticking of the antique clock and the soft whimper of the old food tester who lay weak on the sofa. The doctor had arrived quickly, and said the man would live, but only because he had taken a very small sip. The words hit everyone like thunder. The guests, once excited and cheerful, now sat pale and speechless. Every plate on the table was untouched, the soup bowls growing cold as fear spread through the air. Raymond stood near the table, his face stone-hard, eyes focused on the woman he once thought he would marry. Eleanor sat with her head down, pretending to cry again, though her eyes were dry. Maya stood silently by the door, unsure whether she should stay or leave, her hands shaking as she clutched her apron. The storm outside had grown stronger. Thunder rolled across the dark sky, as if echoing the chaos inside. Raymond finally spoke, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence. "We're going to find out the truth right now," he said quietly. His tone was calm but powerful, the kind that made everyone in the room listen. "But how?" one of the guests whispered. Raymond looked around and said, "We'll test everything." He motioned to the butler. "Bring the dog." Moments later, the butler returned with Max, a large golden retriever that Raymond had raised since he was a pup. The dog wagged his tail happily, unaware of the tension in the air. Raymond knelt beside him, running a hand gently through his fur. "Good boy," he murmured. Then he stood and looked at the butler. "Put the bowl in front of him." Eleanor's eyes widened in shock. "No," she cried out. "That's cruel. You can't do that." Raymond turned toward her, his eyes cold and distant. "If it's safe, then there's nothing cruel about it," he said sharply. The butler placed the bowl of soup in front of Max. The dog leaned forward, sniffed it once, and immediately pulled back, whining softly. His tail tucked between his legs as he backed away, barking once and then hiding behind Raymond. A collective gasp filled the room. Eleanor's face drained of color. Raymond looked at the bowl, then at her. "Even the dog knows the truth," he said quietly. Elena stood up, her chair scraping the floor. "This proves nothing," she shouted. "You're turning everyone against me because of that girl." She pointed at Maya with trembling fingers. "She's lying. She wants your attention." Maya stepped back, tears forming in her eyes. "No, ma'am, I'm not lying," she whispered. "I didn't want any of this. I only wanted to stop something bad." Raymond raised his hand to silence them both. "Enough," he said. "We'll let the truth speak for itself." He turned to the butler again. "Bring the rest of the food from the kitchen." The servants obeyed quickly, placing all the dishes on the table, salads, bread, desserts, all untouched. Raymond picked up one of the glasses of wine and handed it to the chef. "You taste this," he ordered. The chef hesitated, trembling. "Sir, Do it," Raymond said firmly. The chef took a small sip and waited, his eyes wide with fear. After a moment, he nodded shakily. "It's fine, sir." Raymond nodded once, then pointed at the soup. "But that isn't." Everyone could see now that something terrible had been planned. Eleanor's mask of innocence cracked again, her lips twitching nervously as she searched for words. "Raymond, please," she said softly. "You're being manipulated. Someone must have planted that packet in the kitchen to frame me. You know I could never hurt you." Her voice trembled, and for a moment it almost sounded real, but Raymond's heart was already closing off. He had seen too much. "Elena," he said slowly, "before I met you I used to think money could buy truth. Tonight I learned that money only hides lies." The guests looked down, uncomfortable. The storm outside rumbled louder, wind slapping against the glass windows. Maya felt small in the corner, her heart pounding as she watched the man she admired, realized that his entire world had been built on deception. Helena suddenly stood tall again, wiping away her fake tears. "You think you're so smart," she hissed, her voice sharp as glass. "You think you've won because of that maid? You don't know anything." Her tone had changed, colder and darker than before. "If I really wanted to hurt you," she continued, "you'd already be gone." The words sent chills through the room. The guests gasped, some stepping back in fear. Raymond's expression hardened. "Is that a confession?" he asked. Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Call it whatever you want," she said. "But don't act like you're innocent, Raymond. You're no saint. You use people. You throw them away. Maybe tonight was just karma finding you." Raymond said nothing. He just stared at her, silent and steady. The silence between them was louder than the storm outside. After a long moment, he said quietly, "Take her away." The guard stepped forward. Elena tried to resist, but they held her firmly. "You'll regret this." she screamed. "You'll all regret this." Her voice echoed through the hall as she was dragged out, her hair falling over her face. Maya stood frozen, her heart aching. Not for Elena, but for Raymond, who now stood alone among the broken remains of his perfect evening. The soup still sat untouched on the table, its surface calm but deadly. The dog whimpered softly near the door. Raymond walked toward the window and stared out into the rain, his reflection staring back at him. "Truth," he murmured, "is the one thing money can't buy." Maya hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward quietly. "Sir," she said softly, "I'm sorry you had to see this." Raymond turned slightly, offering a faint, tired smile. "Don't be sorry, Maya, you saved me." Outside, lightning flashed again, lighting the sky like a warning from heaven. Inside the mansion, the storm finally began to calm, but the storm inside Raymond's heart was only beginning. He looked at the empty seat where Elena had been and whispered under his breath, "I loved a shadow." And in that moment, he knew his life would never be the same again. The next morning, the mansion felt hollow, as if the night before had stolen its soul. The servants moved quietly, avoiding eye contact while the air still carried the weight of fear and disbelief. Raymond hadn't slept. He sat in his study, staring at the rain outside the tall windows, his mind replaying Elena's words again and again. He could still see her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing, "You'll regret this." Those words haunted him more than the poison itself. On the table before him lay the small silver packet, now sealed in a plastic bag by the police. They had taken Elena away for questioning, but deep down Raymond knew it wasn't over. Something inside him whispered that her story had more darkness to unfold. He rubbed his forehead and sighed heavily. Maya stood quietly at the door holding a tray of tea. "Sir," she said softly, "you should eat something." He turned toward her and gave a tired smile. "Thank you, Maya. You've done enough already." She shook her head gently. "No, sir. I only did what anyone should do." Raymond looked at her with quiet gratitude. She was young, maybe 20, with kind eyes that spoke more honesty than any words. In the middle of chaos, she had been the only light. "You were brave," he said. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Maya lowered her eyes. "I'm just glad you're safe, sir." Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. The butler entered, his face pale. "Sir," he said nervously, "the police are here again. They found something." Raymond stood immediately. "What is it?" Moments later, 2 officers entered the room carrying a small black purse and a folded letter. "This was found in Miss Elena's car," one of them said. "You might want to see it." Raymond hesitated before taking the letter. The handwriting was neat and elegant, Elena's. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the first lines. As he read, the color drained from his face. Maya stepped closer, worried. "Sir, what is it?" Raymond didn't answer at first. His hands trembled slightly as he handed her the note. "Read it," he said softly. Maya looked down and began to read aloud. "My love, if you're reading this, it means they've found me. Don't believe everything they say. What I did wasn't out of hate. It was justice. You ruined lives to build your empire. You took everything from people who had nothing. I wanted you to feel what they felt. I wanted you to lose something precious, just like the ones you destroyed. Don't hate me for what I've done. Hate the man you've become." Maya looked up, her eyes wide with shock. Raymond's face was pale and still. "Is it true?" she asked carefully. He turned away, his eyes distant. "Some of it," he said quietly. "I've made choices I'm not proud of. I've hurt people in business, maybe even broken lives without realizing it. But what she did, that wasn't justice. It was revenge." The officers exchanged glances. "There's more, sir," one said. He handed Raymond a small flash drive. "We found this hidden inside her purse. It contains several bank transfers to an unknown account under a different name." Raymond frowned. "So she was stealing from me?" The officer nodded. "It appears so. Millions over the past few months." The truth hit Raymond like a cold wave. All the affection, the promises, the love, it had all been a cover. A trap dressed in silk and smiles. He closed his eyes for a moment, his heart aching. Maya stood quietly, watching him with sympathy. "Sir," she said gently, "some people wear masks so long that even they forget who they are underneath." He looked at her and gave a faint, sad smile. You speak wisely for someone so young. I've seen what greed does to people, she said softly. It changes them. The officers left soon after, promising to keep him informed. When the door closed, Raymond walked slowly toward the window again. The rain had stopped, and faint sunlight peeked through the grey clouds. It should have felt hopeful, but to him it only reminded him of the calm after a storm, the quiet before another one. As he stood there, a thought struck him. "Maya," he said suddenly, "how long have you been working here?" She looked surprised. "Almost a year, sir. Why? Did you ever notice Elena acting strange before?" Maya hesitated. Sometimes she would go out late at night. She said it was to visit her friend, but she always looked nervous. And once I saw her talking to a man in a black car outside the gate. When she noticed me, she smiled like nothing happened. Raymond's jaw tightened. "Did you recognize him?" "No, sir," she replied. "But he gave me a bad feeling." Raymond nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "I see." There was still more truth hidden behind Elena's lies, and he could feel it. But for now, all he could do was breathe and try to understand how love had blinded him so easily. That evening, when the mansion grew quiet again, Raymond sat alone in the dining hall where everything had started. The chandelier above still sparkled, but it no longer looked beautiful, it looked cold. The memory of Elena's laughter echoed faintly in his mind. He whispered to himself, "How could I not see it?" From the corner of his eye he saw Maya standing silently, with a soft expression of pity and kindness. "Sir," she said, "some truths hurt, so we don't make the same mistake twice." Raymond nodded slowly, his voice breaking slightly as he said, "Maybe you're right." Outside the rain stopped completely, and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. It marked the end of one nightmare and the beginning of a long, painful healing. And though the mansion would one day shine again, the memory of that night, the warning, the poison, and the face of the woman he once loved would never fade from Raymond's heart. A week passed since the night of the poisoned dinner, but the storm that started inside Raymond's heart had not stopped. The mansion was quieter than ever. The laughter of guests and the clinking of glasses were now only memories replaced by whispers and unease. Every servant moved with caution, as if the walls themselves were listening. Raymond spent most of his days locked in his study reading reports, signing papers, and answering endless calls from lawyers and investigators. Elena's arrest had shaken not just his home, but his reputation. News channels had picked up the story, headlines calling him the betrayed billionaire and victim of a lover's revenge. He hated the attention. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like humiliation. One afternoon, as Rain returned to the city, a police officer arrived at the mansion with a sealed envelope. Raymond opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter from Elena, written from the women's prison. His chest tightened as he unfolded it. The words were short but sharp as knives. "You destroyed my father's business. You left us to starve. Everything I did was to make you see the pain you caused. Don't pity me, Raymond. I never loved you. I only wanted you to fall the way my family did." The letter slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. For a long moment he couldn't move. It all made sense now. Years ago he had bought out a small company during a merger, not knowing, or perhaps not caring, that the owner had lost everything. That owner was Elena's father. Raymond had buried the past under money and success, but Elena had carried it like a wound that never healed. Maya entered quietly when she saw him sitting still, eyes dark and distant. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked softly. He looked up slowly. "I ruined her life," he said in a voice that barely sounded like his own. "I took everything from her family, and she took her revenge by pretending to love me." Maya placed the tray on the table and stepped closer. "Sir, what she did was still wrong." She could have told the truth. "She didn't have to hurt you." Raymond gave a weak smile. Maybe she thought I wouldn't listen. His words trailed off as he stared out the window. The rain outside blurred the world like a painting washed with tears. "I built everything on pride," he whispered. "And now all that's left is silence." Maya wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. She simply stood beside him quietly, her presence gentle and steady like a calm breeze. Days passed. Elena's trial began, and the media swarmed the courthouse. Every headline told the same story. Beauty turned to vengeance, love turned to poison. The prosecution presented the evidence, bank transfers, messages, and recordings, and her guilt was undeniable. Yet when she stood in the courtroom dressed in plain grey, she looked strangely peaceful. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she said, "I only did what justice never would." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hollow. The room fell silent. Raymond sat in the back, hidden under a dark hat, his heart heavy. He had come not for revenge, but for closure. When the sentence was announced, 15 years, he felt neither joy nor relief, only emptiness. As he left the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but he said nothing. That night he returned home and walked into the garden where the rain had left droplets on every rose petal. He looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "It's over." But deep down he knew it wasn't. Guilt stayed behind like a shadow that never left. Later, in the quiet of the study, Maya brought him a cup of tea. "Sir," she said, "you've done the right thing by facing the truth." Raymond nodded slowly. "Maybe, but the truth doesn't heal everything." Maya hesitated before speaking. "Then maybe time will." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time noticed the softness in her eyes, the quiet strength that had kept the house standing when everything else had fallen apart. "You've been kind to me, Maya," he said. "More than I deserve." She shook her head gently. "You deserve to be forgiven, sir. Everyone does." Her words touched him more deeply than she could have known. In the weeks that followed, Raymond started to change. He called back the workers who had been laid off during his company's expansion. He rebuilt the small businesses he had crushed years ago. Slowly, the cold image of the ruthless billionaire began to fade, replaced by a man who had finally learned humility. The newspapers noticed and called it a redemption story. But Raymond didn't care about headlines anymore. He cared about peace. One evening, months later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, he walked through the same dining hall where it had all begun. The chandelier above glimmered softly, its light warm now instead of harsh. Maya stood by the table arranging flowers. He paused, watching her for a moment before saying, "You know, I haven't sat here since that night." She turned, smiling faintly. "Maybe it's time you did." He smiled back and sat down. "Maybe it is." For a long while they said nothing, just shared a quiet moment filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, gentle and clean. Raymond took a deep breath and for the first time in a long time felt alive again. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would face it differently. With honesty, with compassion, and maybe, just maybe, with someone who truly cared. The fall had been painful, but it had taught him the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Months passed, and the mansion slowly returned to life. The air no longer carried fear but calm. Flowers bloomed in the garden again, and sunlight filled the halls that once felt empty. Raymond had changed. The proud billionaire who once measured life by wealth now valued honesty, kindness, and peace. He had rebuilt the businesses he once crushed and helped the families who had lost everything. People began to respect him not for his money, but for his heart. Maya still worked at the mansion, though her role had changed. Raymond treated her not as a maid, but as a trusted friend, the person who had saved his life and helped him see the truth. One morning, as they walked through the garden, Raymond said softly, "You know, Maya, I used to think success was about power. Now I see it's about peace." Maya smiled gently. "Peace is worth more than gold, sir." He looked at her, his eyes warm. "Call me Raymond," he said with a small laugh. She hesitated, then smiled back. "All right." "Raymond." They stood quietly, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The world felt new again, full of hope. Raymond took a deep breath and said, "Thank you for reminding me what life really means." Maya looked at him with soft eyes. "You reminded yourself, sir. I just helped you see it." In that moment, surrounded by the gentle morning light, Raymond realized that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. The past would always remain a scar, but it no longer hurt. It had become a lesson, one that taught him what true love and redemption really were.